Most anglers start fishing with a rod and reel. It's an economical way to find out if angling is for you, and also offers the greatest extent of access to fish because of the ability to sling a bait at least 30 yards with very little experience. A simple underhand chuck can be sufficient, and when you feel you have control, you can move on to a variety of overhead casts. In this programme, we're going to join Bob Nudd, MBE 4 times World Course Angling Champion, as he demonstrates in his usual easygoing manner some of the techniques that have helped him achieve a virtually unbeatable standing in the angling world. We'll look at stillwater course fishing to start with, and then pick some of his best bits for river fishing. A useful and enlightening guide for all rod and line anglers.
What fantastic weather. I mean, it's early August and we're in the middle of a heat wave. The last time I remember anything like this was 1976. That's a few years ago, isn't it? And then, do you know what happened then? There was a massive explosion of fish. You know, they bred really well that year, and it followed on that the fishing was great for sort of 7 or 8 years after, so perhaps we've got that to come. Because it's very warm, the fish grow quick. When they actually breed, they grow much quicker and they survive the winter. I'm here at Pisces Caravan Park, which is a holiday park, but there's several lakes which anglers who stay at the holiday park can fish. It's not a day ticket water. This actually is a syndicate water, and I happen to be a syndicate member. Lucky me, free of charge, of course. And what I'm going to do today is explain the method feeder. The method, now the word method is when it came out about 8 years ago, it was the method. It was the best way to catch carp, with a ball of ground bait round a feeder and with a fairly short hook length close to it. It's changed a little bit since then, but I was going to go through today the different ways that you could fish a method feeder. But as always, to begin with, you need to mix your ground bait. A method feeder uses ground bait, and my particular choice today is a Vandenine Super Method Mix. This is a 2 kilo bag. You can get easily through 2 kilo in a session, so a good big bag of ground bait. Doesn't really need any other additives with it. I do add a bit of my favourite sort of flavour into the water, so the whole of the ground bait in its dry contents goes in to the bag. And then what I do is, and this is one of my favourite carp mixes, it's liquid Super Scopex. That is added to the water. So you can add that to the water, a reasonable amount, probably sort of almost a quarter of that container into 2 pints of water. And then, as always with ground bait, you've got your dry contents. Add the water carefully so that you can actually assess the amount of water going in. So I use one of these Drennan bait tubs to add this water in. Just get it in there, and it will need 2 or 3 goes. It will dry out, then you need to add some more, and then finally put it through a big riddle. Although there's some nice large pieces in there, I'll show you how you can actually riddle the ground bait into smaller pieces, but still put these large, big chunks of bait. There, look, there's one. There's one of these large chunks which are attractive to carp. There, big flake, or anything like this. All these bits we'll put back in. So add the water, leave it to dry, then add it again and riddle it. So we need to do a bit more work on that, but that's always the first job when you arrive at the riverbank, or the lake bank as it is here, lakeside. Now I'm using a large mesh ground bait riddle, really big mesh. You don't want this ground bait too fine anyway, and as I said earlier, what happens is, you'll see this, when I riddle it, it goes through very easily, but there will be some big lumps, big hard lumps remaining, but these smaller, wetter lumps, just rub them through. Don't waste anything. These carp are really greedy. They will eat everything. Now look, that's what I was telling you about. Those larger pieces there, here, here, here. Once you've got the wet lumps of ground bait through, just put them back in. Do the lot. Takes no time to do a kilo. You can do that rest of it. So first of all, just pick the whole bucket up and riddle it, so you get all the sort of slightly drier pieces through. Then you can see your wet pieces. These are your wet pieces. You can just rub those through very carefully with your hand. Try not to squash them too much, but this type of diamond mesh on a ground bait riddle actually cuts through the ground bait. Actually cuts through it. So now everything is there. There's a few big pieces which the carp are going to eat. But what you get is a very fine texture which will easily mould round the method feeder. Now I've already had a couple of casts with the feeder just to get my distance. I'm using a line clip, I'm fishing to that reed bank on the other side, so I need to clip up, get nice and tight to those reeds every cast. Try and keep the feeder going in the same place. I'm using a piece of sweet corn on the hook because it usually deters. Smaller fish will take it, but if you use maggots, generally they can get attacked by smaller fish. But you always have to muck about with what you're going to use. Now the feeder itself, this one, is a coil feeder, and what I'm doing, method is where it's like a ball of ground bait. You can imagine that. Look at that. That is actually, if you threw that in, that would be like you'd throw a ball of ground bait in anywhere, wouldn't it? And it makes a noise. Fish are always attracted by noise. So when you cast out, it's a big bush, makes a big noise. And of course your hook bait is sort of 10 inches away. You can have it 5 inches. You need to vary that sometimes as you fish, but I can chat about that later on. So basically that's it. A big ball of ground bait with your hook bait close by, and that's all it is. It's a fairly simple setup. Now when you go to cast, always pick a far bank marker so you're casting in the same position each time. Keep the rod vertical and bring the feeder behind you. As long as you cast and keep the rod vertical, pointing towards your marker, then your actual feeder will go in that direction. It will keep straight. The more vertical you can keep it, of course, the better it is. So back behind you, keep this nice and close, get your feeder behind you, there, and then bang, almost into those reed beds. But because I'm clipped up, I can cast with confidence. I know that round that bed of weeds on the far bank, that's where carp are liable to patrol. And I'm casting right on the edge of it. So when you pick your spot to fish, try and pick a spot where you know that fish are going to be anyway. So I've just cast out, left cast to the clip the rod over, and then just watch. And quite often you'll get little line bites, and I've got them now, where fish come in to the ground bait and start knocking the ball, and there it goes round straight away, and there's one on. What a great start. That was almost instant, wasn't it? Cast out, few line bites. That is the real power of the method. Cast out, just a little flicker, round the tip goes. What's this? It is a carp. When it took off, first of all, I didn't think it was, but it is. Look how they fight. Just controlling it nice and steady, but I'm back winding now because it's whizzing off. Just found out it's hooked, I think. It came in so easily. Now it's whizzing back out again. This is a fantastic way of fishing. Just got my clutch set a little bit. There, just clicking just a little bit. Oh dear, that's brilliant. Just hear that clutch going. But I can still, if it really roars, I'll back wind on it. That is really a lot of power though. A lot of power in the tackle that I'm using, and I'll run through that in a minute with you. Just playing the fish and powerfully lifting it, got it on the surface. Oh. Oh. Do you know what? I thought I'd got that fish tamed. It was on the top, coming in, and it's gone again. That's incredible. Ah, that's up now. But what a fight. Real fat fish. Look at that. What a cracking fish to start off with. Look at, oh, lovely. What a beauty. Beautiful, such lovely condition. And a bit like a football, perfectly hooked just in the lip. Look at that, the hook's just there, just in the lip. But that was a perfect bite, hooked itself. All I did was lift it into the fish. And that, look, ooh, it's still fighting. They are so strong. Try and get hold of that so I can show that to camera, because that is just a wonderful fish. Look at that. Beautiful, plump, absolutely perfect condition. The wagglers can be a brilliant method. You know, particularly if you're starting fishing, not expensive. Do you know what I call these fish? Bars of soap. They're so hard to hold. There, look at that, massive one. Just unhooking. Just got the hook. Only fishing with a 20 hook because I thought I'd put a fairly light, I want to fish a couple of waggler rigs today. I put a fairly light one up. Fishing 2 maggots just off bottom and feeding casters. Look at that, eh? A 3-pound tench straight away. Beautiful fish. But waggler fishing itself, you know, it is a brilliant way to start fishing. Not expensive. And of course, when you catch a big fish like that, you can backwind on the reel, you can let it run, you can do whatever you want. So it's a different method. In fact, this is how we all started. Before poles come in, there was wagglers, stick floats or feeders, and this actually is how I learnt my craft, with a waggler. Now it's not easy, you know, I know it's not easy when you first start fishing to have everything. I mean, I've been fishing for years, so I've got everything exactly as I want it, but try as best you can. If you look at my setup, if you look at where I've got my keep net, nice and easy to put the fish in. I don't actually have to get up and walk 10 yards to put the fish away. I drop it into the net without damaging it. I've got a rod rest to support the rod there, to support the waggler rod. I'm resting the butt on my knee, and I can actually have both hands free, like that. So that if I want to feed, both hands free for feeding. And what I'm doing at the moment, just loose feeding a few casters. And that early tench was great, but I'm actually getting the swim going. So I'm loose feeding, letting a few casters drop through the water. Like that, just keep loose feeding, keep working. And see where I've got my bait? There. I can pick up, get to all my bait without moving. So I'm really comfortable, and it's so important to be comfortable when you're fishing. If you're comfortable, you catch more fish, and you fish for longer. You know, you catch more fish, you're more comfortable, you don't want to go home early. So get your setup right. Rod lovely there in the rest, ready to strike. Float, which is a visual mark to feed to. And what I'm trying to do, I'm fishing just off the bottom with this waggler, just off bottom. There is a few small perch, I'm told, in here that are a bit of a nuisance. So I've actually lifting, because I'm fishing maggot on the hook, I've lifted my bait off the bottom a little bit and try and getting the fish to swim into this loose feed as it drops through the water. And as with all fishing, it just takes a bit of time as you're feeding to get the fish interested, to get them excited. And the good thing about waggler fishing is you've got so much flexibility. You know, you've got plenty of room if the fish wants to run, lots of flexibility, cast where you want, nice and easy. If it's a windy day, it doesn't matter, it's not like holding a pole, it's only a very, very, very light rod. But keep trying, the same as whatever fishing you're doing, Pick a marker on the far bank to cast to. Keep your feed going in the same area. Just dropping through the water all the time. And gradually try to work your swim up. Keep fishing, fishing, working. And as the day goes on, more and more fish will build up in your swim. This is brilliant fishing. Another one of those bream, I think. Oh yeah, a smaller one this time, but oh, terrific. Look at that. Lovely fish. Lovely quality fish. This is what fishing's all about. Look at that. Doesn't want to come in. Bream don't usually fight like this. Oh. Mind you, they're usually a bit better when you get them in the net. Just lip hooked again. Fabulous condition. Fabulous condition. Look at that fish. Beautiful. Just lip hooked again. I can easily get that barbless hook out. Beautiful. That size we call skimmers. You know, it's probably just under a pound. So, but look at those beautiful jet black eyes. Look at the fins, black tinged, perfect condition. Lovely fish. I can see I'm going to have a great day. There's two ways to cast a waggler. It just depends how far you've got to go. You know, if you've got a really good distance, you've got to bang it, then you need an overhead cast. But quite often you can just do an underarm sort of swing. And if you get it right, it's just a matter of timing. Your finger on the spool and hold the line 2 or 3 inches above the hook. Don't hold the hook because you might go out with it. And then it's just a swing and a pivot. And as you get to a certain point, which is where you want your float to go, then you actually let go of the reel. So you round, down and flick like that. And just as it hits the bottom, you can touch your spool there just to stop it. The line's out dead in front of you. And to sink the line, if you want the float to stay dead still in the position it is at the moment, if you put your tip under the water, just put your tip under the water and you can either flick it to the left or the right, it doesn't matter, but just flick it hard like that. What happens, because it's the speed that you do it, pulls and sinks the line. And you need to do this when you're fishing a waggler, because in windy conditions, there's a little bit of wind today, line on the surface, the wind will pick it up and it will blow your float, it will move your float about, and you need your float to stay still. The fish are aware. If a float starts kiting around the bait goes with it, they know there's something wrong, so you won't get a bite. But you need to not always sink the line, but today we do need to sink the line. That's why I'm using a feeder line. I said I was using a feeder line. That is why, because it will sink quite easily. And then just go through this again. Look, I've got the rod resting on my knee, on the rod rest, 2 hands completely free to fire whatever I want. And I'm just, at the moment, just loose feeding a few casters, letting them drop through the water. I'm fishing a light waggler, so I need things to keep happening. And with fishing, it's always about feeding. As soon as you stop feeding, the fish lose interest. The loose offerings, you've just got to make them love all that extra, those bits of loose feed dropping through, and they're quite happy. And then when they see your hook bait, of course, they go for that, and then you've got them. And that really is the art of angling. Just feeding, little bite, then just a little touch, a little twist. They did warn me there was some small fish in here, and I'm just hoping it's not one of them. They did warn me that there's some small. Oh, it is one of them, one of those little perch. Somebody warned me, look. I saw the float, it hardly went under. Look at that. Oh dear, we won't count that one, it's a bit too small. I don't even know how it got those 2 big maggots in its mouth. Little tiny perch. I'll slip him straight back, I won't even put him in the net. So it's all about feeding and just being smooth and comfortable. Oh, straight in again, lovely. Just a real gentle bite that time. Another one of these bream. Bigger one, I think. Oh, lovely fish. Some action today. Look at this one. Lovely. Just and with this waggler, you do have a fair control, and you know, even on this quite big fish, fairly light line, I'm very, very confident. I've got a good light rod. I mean, not everybody can afford this sort of rod. It's a special one. It's a Browning Carboxy Max rod. Only weighs 5 ounces. Look at that lovely bream. 14 foot, you know, so ultra light. Well, that's a bigger specimen. Nicely hooked though, eh? Look at that, eh? Another bream. Just hooked in the mouth. I can just see it down there. Use my disgorger on it. Always try and be careful with the fish. See how easy that hook came out? Beautiful condition. Hey, this is great fishing, isn't it? So, what exactly is feeder fishing? Well, I don't even know who thought of it. It was probably the late 70s, but another brilliant idea from an angler where you can get a small amount of feed, and here is one of the feeders, probably similar to the one I'll be using today, but pack that with ground bait and goodies. Today it'll be chopworm and caster, and it enables you to fish at distance with a rod, say 40, 50 metres out into a lake, and bream, which we're going for today, tend to be a little bit further out, but enables you to get a small package of food very, very accurately. You can set a line clip on your reel so that you cast exactly the same distance each time. You pick a marker on the far bank, so every time that feeder falls in the same spot. And this is what I always say about fishing, that's the secret, that's feeding. So accuracy, a very, very tight dinner table of food for those fish to come into, you know, so that means you just catch more fish. Everything's concentrated. So that's feeder fishing, a parcel of food, and that is reasonably close to the hook. I'll sort of empty that, I'll show you how to do it later. But first of all, when you get to the lake, you look at a wide expanse of water and you think, well, how deep is it? You know, where am I going to fish? Where are the clear bits? So what I always do to start is I actually use a little Arsley bomb on the rod, say a 3/4 ounce Arsley bomb, to sort of, you know, when you're plumbing with a pole, you search round to find out the different depths. Well, I do the same with a bomb. You cast it out and you check how long it takes for the actual tip, as you cast out, for the tip to come back. So you search the peg, search the peg, search the peg. And it's same, it's plumbing up with a bomb. You need to know where you're fishing. So I've already picked roughly where I want to fish, which is probably 45 or 50 metres out. A nice clearish area, but it's very, very shallow. So, and I knew that. I cast out with the lead, cast out, and the tip didn't come back. So I knew immediately it was very, very shallow. You know, normally you can count through one. Say if it's 10 foot deep, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and about usually a count of 6 with a 3/4 ounce bomb, and it's 10 foot deep. It's experience. But today I cast out, boom, it was there immediately. So I know it's very, very shallow. But always cast around with a bomb, find out where you're going to fish. Now I've just finished the ground bait off. I actually added a little bit more water to it and then put it through an ordinary maggot riddle. And that's important because as you add water to ground bait, you get odd bigger lumps which are wetter and drier. The drier stuff goes straight through. You need to mix those two together, and the result is this, and it's a very, very light, soft mix that's going to come out of the feeder really easily, but a very, very light mix. But it's always important, you must riddle the ground bait. Once you think you've got it right, run it through a riddle, and then you get this lovely even texture of water all the way through. The actual, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the middle of this ground bait, we call it blocking off, but I'm going to put a mixture of chopped worm and casters. So I've already chopped some worms up, quite a gruesome job actually chopping worms up, so I've already done them, just to stop you girls from screaming. There are a few chopped worms. I'm going to mix a lot of casters in with that. and mix a lot of casters in with that. Bream love casters. I'm going to mix some casters in there. And each cast I'm going to put a good, a good helping, probably that much each cast, which goes in the middle of the feeder and then blocked off either end with ground bait. So that's going to be the feed. Loads of particles in the middle of ground bait. The ground bait bursts out and reveals all of this as well. So all the time we're packing feed, and it doesn't take long to put 2 pints of that particle feed into your peg. Straight in. One of these, and it's definitely one of these big bream. Just exactly what I've come for today. Quite difficult fishing because it's shallow, but I started off like when you're feeder fishing, you want to get a few casts. So what I did before we got actually going, I cast about probably 10 times very quickly just to get a nice feed area. And then put 4 maggots on the hook, cast, left it, and the tip just went whizzing round. And these are good. It's very shallow water, and these are good, hard fighting bream. You can see that tip is really banging. Oh. Lovely fish. I fished here once before, and I remember then the bream I caught were fabulous, really good quality and big fish. Here it comes, just coming round on the surface now. Lovely big bream. This is what feeder fishing is all about. Nice big powerful bream as well. Look at that, look at the size of that one. Lovely fish. You can see the 4 maggots sticking out of its mouth. Big, oh dear, so much power. You can usually pick bream up like that, just pick them up on the heads. That's what I usually do. Probably about £3 that one. Lovely bite, tip went round. What a good start to the day. As I said, a few feederfuls, and what I've done, I've actually picked a marker on the far bank so that you know that you're actually casting in the same spot every time. Hold the rod vertical back, and then just a good cast. It actually hits the line clip so that you know it's exactly the same distance. So if you pick a marker on the far bank, you go to your clip every time the feeder is in the same spot. So that bream is waiting there, not from that feeder full that you've just thrown out, but from the one before. That's the real secret. You know, it's on the food already, waiting to take it. And then what I do is, once the feeder hits the bottom, it's very, 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 very shallow. I just move the feeder a little bit back towards me. Just back towards me, so the feeder empties. I'm just emptying the feeder and then pulling the hook bait. If you can imagine it, you empty the feeder and you pull the hook bait back to where all the contents have come out of the feeder as well. I'm into another one. Oh, this is great fishing. Once the breams settle on that feed, you know, because I put those 10 feederfuls in quickly, once they settle on that, then it becomes easier. You know, you've got a nice tight dinner table for the fish. It becomes easy to catch them. Now you noticed I hardly struck on that one. The reason was I'm using braid. Always when I'm feeder fishing at distance, I like to use braid, and this one is about probably 0.7mm diameter. Now you imagine that in normal line, 0.7mm, so it's really fine. But it's got no stretch, so you connect immediately with the fish without any problem. You're straight into the fish, and when you want to move your feeder, you know, when your feeder hits the bottom, you want to move it, you just pull it along. You can move it very easily. Who said bream don't fight? This is brilliant. Really see it banging away on the tip. Lovely, really powerful fish. I love, people think I'm just a pole angler, but I love feeder fishing. It's so shallow out there too that the bream very, very quickly come to the top. Oh, I've got a little swan coming to see me. I hope swans don't eat bream. Lovely, just bringing it around. Another, it's a good fish. It's incredible. Once you get the fish there, oh, look at that, I love it. I bet it's, oh, it's a beauty. Once you get the fish on the feed, you know, bream are a shoal fish, and you can catch loads of them. Oh. Lovely. That's a beautiful fish. Probably getting on for £4, that one. It's just got the signs just on its, on the top of the head, the signs of spawning nodules, just these little white marks. They're not ready to spawn yet because the water's too cold, but they're just preparing for that. Lovely fishing. Hooked. And sometimes I do take the hook down a bit, and what I do, you know, if a fish takes a hook down, don't try and dig it out. You can actually just cut the line. Much better to cut the line. I'm using a barbless hook, and that will get rid of it quite easily. Beautiful bream. What a lovely start. What is a stick float? Well, a stick float, unlike a waggler is attached by the bottom end only. A stick float is attached at both ends, top and bottom. And this enables you, if you want to slow the bait down more than you would with a waggler. And you also would fish probably less of a distance out as well, so you can get your rod and get right behind the float and ease it down through your peg. And this one is quite a big stick float. We've got pacey water. I've got 10 number 6 shot, non-toxic number 6 shot, which would be, that would probably be about 1 gram, because each number 6 shot weighs 0.1 of a gram, and then some droppers, and I'll run through that with you now. But the hook to start with, because when you fish a stick float, you tend to strike quite hard. You have to strike through the float to the fish, more than you would with a waggler, which is more of a sort of a controlled and strike through it. You have to pull right through the float. So the pattern I've selected is a Camasan B711. It's a size 15, but a fairly strong, it's a round bend bronze hook, but it's fairly strong pattern, so that you don't straighten the hook when you strike. The hook line is 2.5 pounds, 2.5 or 3 pounds is about right. It's sort of fairly strong. And I've got a hook length of somewhere about 15 inches. And I've put a number 8 shot on the hook length, and I can move that up and down if I want. And then I've got 2 loops here, so I've attached this loop to loop, and then I've put another number 8 just above that loop. And then 2 inches, everything is much tighter than with a waggler. And then another, just over 2 inches above there, I've got another number 8 shot. And then I've shotted this, we call it shirt button style, where I've actually spaced probably just over 2 inches between these number 6 non-toxic shot. I've got them equally spaced all the way up to just below the float. If you follow it all the way up, and you can see why they call it shirt button, because it's exactly what it is. It's a shirt button for fishing on the drop, but still being positive. Up to the float itself, which most stick floats are made with a balsa body, a balsa tip, and this one also has got a heavy cane green heart bottom to give it weight. That's the weight, that's the casting weight and the holding weight to balance the float. So there's actually a lot of stability in that float itself. The rod is the same as that I was using on the Waggler. It's a 14-foot ultra light, but still a good fast action. But because this is nice, fast, but soft action, I can use these light hook lengths. And the main line is £3 breaking strain, three or 4 pound, fairly thin line. And the line wants to float. I like to use, if I'm going on a session, I like to use fairly new line, or else you can spray it with furniture polish, or you can get a special floating spray. So that's basically the setup. The fishing itself is, as I say, is much closer. Everything is much closer in, so that when you start to fish, you're fishing a shorter distance. You can loose feed by hand. The technique is just a little bit different, and I'll just run it through with you exactly what to do. The fishing's so fantastic. I can't wait to get out there again. It's really good, especially with this positive style of fishing. We're out, and immediately I'm sort of into the fish. They're waiting. Nice little underarm cast, shirt button style. The shots go spinning out. You can loose feed behind, and straight away I'm into a fish. That was on the drop. Immediately it took hold of it. You can tell they're really coming up into the food now. Another lovely little dace. Beautiful fish. Now remember when I spoke about the Waggler, I said it was difficult on these fast flowing rivers to plumb the depth, but with a stick float you've got a few more options, because you can put a plummet on there because it's attached top and bottom. Fish back. You can ascertain the depth. So just a normal plummet on the hook. And a good idea is if you sort of stand up and do this, because you need to lean over. So you've attached the plummet, you can flick, and you can sort of feel the depth. If I flick this out now, just watch this go out. Sort of, I can see. Did you see that plummet when it hit? Sort of, just hit the bottom there, which tells you you're fishing at just the right depth. You can see the plummet just going down there. If it caught up too much as it went down, then you would shallow up. But that's just about right. It's a bit over depth. If you're fishing, and it doesn't apply today, but if you're fishing and with a stick float or any float, Waggler, and not getting bites, then you can, normally if you're not getting bites, you increase the depth. You know, if it's more difficult, it gives you more line on the bottom, gives you more chance to catch fish. But the more bites you're getting, then you can shallow up because the fish are coming up in the water. So at the moment we're fishing just about dead depth, and you can do it with a plummet because it's top and bottom. It doesn't drag under, and you can see how I could hold that plummet and sort of work, and you can feel the gravel bottom as well, so you know that you're on just about the right depth. The only thing is that although we're fishing very heavy, the fish are just not allowing the bait to get to the bottom, and it's brilliant. I love it. And we know we're on the right depth. We've got the shirt button style, couple of maggots, and my usual trick, always pick out the big maggots. I'm not using a swivel on this occasion to connect them, because you tend not to cast as far or bring back as far as you would with a Waggler, so it's not necessary. As I said, I'm using a loop to attach the hook length to the main line. So flick out, down, everything's dead in line, nothing tangles, and you can almost hold that float and just watch it as it goes down. Watch the float, watch for it to go under. There, under, just started to go under. This was a small fish. It's a bleak. There is bleak here, and they move in more the more maggots you put in. And that's just one of those kipper bleak that I was talking about earlier. Really greedy little fellows that take the bait on the way down. But normally the dace will beat them to it. It's fantastic fishing. Now normally when you're stick float fishing on a river, particularly a fast river like this, you would stand up. You would just stand just in the water, the water's edge. You don't have to go out too far, but because you're standing, you're more up and over and behind your float. You know, everything is much easier. I'm sitting on my box today because it's easier for the cameraman, but it's better if you've got a stable base. But just to demonstrate what, if you're standing up, the baiting up, everything is the same, but you can, everything then, the feeding becomes much easier, feeding by hand, because you're standing up, you've got more height. Cast is the same, you can go out, behind your float, and then you can feed, easy, you're there, your fingers on there, fingers on your spool, ready, behind your float, just let it run down, watching it, and you're into a fish. Straight away, this is a small one. Seems to be a mixture of fish here today, dace and bleak. It's a little tiny fish. But when you're this is a dace actually, but when you're standing in the water, everything is so much easier. Beautiful, that is a little tiny dace, that one. You wouldn't think they get these two, well I say tiny, it's probably 1.5 ounces, still brilliant fish. But standing up makes everything better, and the wind also. The wind is coming up at me today, and this is ideal stick float conditions. You know, an upstream wind with the water going against it is perfect because it holds your line back naturally. Makes it much, much easier to fish. And your line is floating, you just leave your line on the surface. And the same technique, a nice underarm flick, and you can pull back against your float, like that, pull back, hold back, feed. Just hold back, watch your float as it drifts down. Just watch your float and then strike. It's a good, another nice fish. Just strike a good hard strike so you come through the rod. I lost that one, but a good hard strike so you go through the float into the fish. Dace are the sort of fish that twist and turn, and you do lose the odd fish, not too many. I'll run through that again. It's so much easier when you're standing because you're more over everything. Just a nice easy cast. The cast is the same as the waggler virtually, but you must remember to stop the float. So you cast and you stop the float by trapping the line, and you can feed. Just watch your float as it goes downstream and you're into the fish. Just a hard strike through, clip the bail arm over. I've lost that fish. Really smash the bait up. Don't worry, there's so many fish there, you lose the odd fish, it's not a problem. I've got a very, very small barb on this hook. It's sort of a micro barb, so it doesn't damage the fish. But you do need, I find that you do need just a tiny, you can fish barbless, but you do need just this little tiny barb on the hook. Keep this bait going in. Remember, feeding's the most important part of fishing. Get the fish there, get them feeding. Get ready to strike when that float goes. You strike through the rod, fish is on, flick over. It's just a fish every cast. Some are small, but they really vary. This is a dace as well. I thought it was a bleak, but it's a dace. Very small. Just a beautiful little dace. Tiny, only 1 ounce. The river is absolutely full of fish. If one maggot's good, don't go back in if the maggots are damaged, but if one maggot's good, you don't need to replace it. Remember the cast, the same, shirt button style, behind the float, so easy. Flick the maggots out, upstream of your float, and your fingers there ready to trap down on the line when you get a bite. When you get a bite, just finger down, trap down on the line like that. So there, just let your float run. When you get a bite, just trap, worry about striking first, then when you've hooked the fish, then flick it over. Another little tiny fish. So it's that sequence of striking that you have to get right. I'm going to sit down again because it's easier for the program. More difficult for me, but it is more comfortable when you're sitting down anyway. And it's we're not fishing too far, and it is very, very easy fishing. When you're feeding maggots, you know, when you're feeding something like maggots, and you look at a river, you think, you know, how fast is that flowing? Where are the fish finishing up? You know, and you have to. A maggot is fairly light, so on a powerful river that's probably going quite a way, so on a slower moving river, you can put your maggots closer to the float, you know, because they go down quicker. But a river like this, I'm probably putting my bait in sort of 3 or 4 meters above where the float's going in, and then catching off of the last lot of feed. It's the same as with a waggler. You know, when you cast your float out and feed there, you don't catch off of that feed. You catch off of the feed that you put in before. So just work that out, because it takes time for the bait to get there. I doubt any bait is ever reaching the bottom. So what I mean is, you cast out, get the float and get behind the float with the line, and then you feed. And that's probably 3 or 4 meters above where my fish are coming from there, which is just there. So it's 3 or 4 meters difference. It's incredible fishing. In fact, you know, if I don't concentrate, I just get absolutely smashed maggots. Look at that, you know, not concentrating, thinking more about talking to camera. I get absolutely smashed maggots. The action is so, well, it's so quick, it's hard to work it out. But remember, when you're feeding these maggots, I mean, they're fairly light, so they're taking a fair bit of time to get down the peg. So really, this cast, I'm catching off of the last lot of maggots. The last lot of maggots have gone in, the fish are eating them, and they've now thinking and moving upstream and thinking, oh, what's going on there? And straight away, they're looking for more bait, and mine comes down. And the maggots I've thrown in still haven't reached that spot yet. They'll get there now, and the fish, while I'm bringing this fish in, the fish are feeding on the last lot of maggots, so that when you go back in again, they're all excited. They've had all these freebies, and there's been no hook in them. Not that these would know about a hook, because they've never been caught before, but there's all these freebie maggots, and that's the real art of angling, isn't it? It's overcoming the fish's fear. They've come into these maggots, they're eating them, and then when yours goes in with a hook on, which won't be the same as far as presentation goes, but they're so wild because they've been going at it, they take yours and you catch them much easier. The knot I've used for joining the hook length to the main line is just what they call loop to loop. It's where you make 2 loops, one in the main line and one in the hook length, and you can thread one through the other. But you must make sure you tie the hook length knot, the loop, and the main line loop correctly. So to do this, I'm just demonstrating with a length of line here. So to tie a correct loop, you fold the line over like that and just wrap it round your fingers to form, if you look at it, to form a loop. This is double line and there's a little loop there. If you get hold of this loop here and sort of take it away from you, and you've got to take it round and bring it back through. This is called a figure of 8 loop, and I'll demonstrate that to you in a sec. So you bring it round, you bring it through, and there. And there, if you look at it, can you see how it's a figure of 8? Now that is important, that is quite critical, because this knot doesn't cut into itself. It won't cut into itself. I mean, always just a little bit of water, a little bit of saliva on the knot. And if I pull that, you'll find that knot is sort of 90% strength. If I test it, and you can always test knots by putting either a pencil, or I've got a disgorger here, through the loop and then pulling on the loop like that. Pull as hard as you can. Now this line is probably 5 or 6 pound breaking strain, but I can't break it. I'm pulling, eventually it goes. So that's about a 95%. I'm going to show you one which most people do, just to demonstrate the difference. If you do what nearly everybody does, particularly when they start fishing, which is a granny knot, where you just, once again, you form that loop like I've done there, but if you just tuck that back through, this is what everybody does and they shouldn't do. If you look at that knot, that isn't a figure of 8 knot. Can you see the difference between that and the last one that I did? It looks the same when you do it quickly, but it isn't, because we haven't got that figure of 8. A little bit of water again, and I'll demonstrate the difference. So that's a granny knot. This is the knot that most people use. Even some quite experienced anglers use this knot and get away with it somehow, I don't know. But if now I put some pressure on that, it breaks as easily as anything. That's about 20% knot strength. But that is the knot that most anglers use. So remember, when you're tying a loop to loop, do the figure of 8, make sure it looks like a figure of 8. This is one of the basics of your starting fishing. And as I said, but even experienced anglers get it wrong. And then once you've done those 2 loops, you can thread, if you thread one inside the other and put the hook through it and pull it, then you've got your hook length attached to your main line. There's loads of fish now and they're coming up in the water. So the shirt button style I used, you can change that. If this happens to you, you get loads of fish on the drop and you need to be a bit more positive. Can you see I've pulled all those shot there together? Pulled them all together sort of like a bulk. That's almost 1 gram in a bulk. And then I've still got the spread below of the 3 number 8 shot down to the hook length, and then the 3 number 8 shot. But that bulk is sort of probably about 20 inches from the hook, so that I go in and I'm really positive down to the fish. More bites, fish are going crazy, so you want to see what's happened. So, but the casting, everything's just the same, hold it just the same, feed just the same, but everything's more positive. If the float doesn't take up, if it holds up, then you strike, and straight away small fish was on. Just let it go. But little tiny fish took it as it was trying to settle. There's so many fish, and if you throw maggots in the edge here, you see what's happening out there, because there's tons of little fish that immediately descend on the maggots, and the same's happening out there. As you feed, there's loads of fish descending on the maggots. So out, just the same, but the float settles up a lot more quickly. Settles up a lot more quickly. The shot, you can hold back on the float, get the bite, just the same, and the fish is on. So just a more positive way of fishing is when you can bolt the shot together. That's just another way of shotting a stick float, as opposed to the shirt button style. Now rivers can vary depending on the time of the year. In summer there'll be plenty of dace, although it's quite difficult fishing. But usually this type of river, you know, the dace run through, and as you get more into the winter, you know, when it gets real hard frost and it's cold, then the fish then you'll find tend to move in to the nearest towns, which would be sort of Hereford and Ross-on-Wye. The fish would move into those areas, and that's where you'll catch them. So they're not always, you have to be careful of where you fish, you know, beware of where you go. Every time the maggot drops in, the fish take it, have a go for it. But there's a lot of small ones, and sometimes you miss a bite from a small one. So just really look at where you're going to fish and the time of the year. But this is sort of late September and a perfect time to find the dace running on the Wye. I'm now catching these fish at about 1 a minute. There's so many there. You can go in, virtually go in and strike, count to sort of 1, 2, 3, strike, and there's a fish there straight away. But you know, this is what happens when you feed correctly. Every cast, this is what happens. You can catch a fish every cast. The dace are now really fighting. There's other fish there, bleak, but the dace are now up and fighting for the food. So every time I go in, one is grabbing, it's had a load of freebies. It's taking my maggot straight away. So you just go in, fish a minute. I mean, this is really successful river fishing. You just go in, let the float go down, just virtually count 1, 2, 3, and the fish is on. As quick as that. That's what happens when you feed correctly. And another dace. That was probably 2 fish in less than a minute. Brilliant, brilliant fishing. So when you're fishing with the bulk down, you'll see the float will settle much quicker. There's a bite almost straight away, and the fish is on. But the float will settle, everything will be much more positive. The float settles quicker. You see the bite quicker, and you do this. And the reason for doing this is when there's lots more, when you're getting too many bites and you can't really sort out what's happening, then with this positive shotting, your float's settling much quicker. And look, there's the result. Bigger fish, a nice, beautiful 4-ounce dace. Lovely fish. Beautiful fish to finish up with. A brilliant dace fishing. I'm going to have just a quick look at what I've got. There's loads of dace there, but when you're releasing fish, get them to the front of your net under the water. So in other words, the net is not rubbing against the fish. Listen to that lot there. And really, I wasn't fishing for that long. And a tremendous weight there. Look, lovely dace, probably 12 or 14 pound of dace. But get them to the front of the net and then release them carefully, and they all will swim away. Look at that. Over 100 dace there, I should think. Fabulous.